There's a phrase in regards to storytelling that goes, your answer is only as deep as your problem, meaning your story's highest emotional highs are fueled inversely by its lowest emotional lows. You need the sads as well as the happies if you really want the emotions in your story to land with your audience. Tears of the Kingdom managed one of these better than the other, and as a result, delivered a dramatic ending that ends up reading more nonsensical and retcon than it does satisfying, rewarding, and conclusive. To show you what I mean, I'll start with a recounting and critique of the finale itself, and finish by taking you on an investigative journey to identify the choices Nintendo made along the way that made the ending what it was. So while most stories start at the beginning, since this essay is a sequel to the one that already did that, let's start this story at the end. As you make the final descent to fight the Demon King, you have full context of the story so far. Ganondorf was an evil bad man, the king of the Gerudo, who killed Sonia, the Hylian wife of Rauru, the first Zonai king of Hyrule, in order to steal her secret stone, an ancient Zonai artifact that enhances its user's latent power. This secret stone transforms him into the fearsome Demon King, whom Rauru and his friends were unable to defeat, leading the king to sacrifice himself to seal Ganondorf away in the very depths you find yourself plummeting into now. On your back, you have the Master Sword, the fabled blade of legend capable of sealing the darkness that just finished soaking for a millennium in the holy sacred light of the Light Dragon, who turned out to be our beloved Princess Zelda, who sacrificed herself to turn into this mindless holy beast in order to restore the Master Sword to maximum power, and in this form wait for you in her future, which has now become our present, due to mysteriously traveling back to the ancient past as the prophecy foretold when our adventure began in the beginning of the game. With you were the descendants of Raru's friends, the ones whom the king gave secret stones and the title of Sage, along with Minoru, Raru's sister, who as a Zonai had a pre-existing secret stone of her own. Together with Minoru and the Sage descendants by your side, you go to do now what those who came before you could not. Defeat the Demon King. The final showdown is about to take place. After defeating 3 waves of the Demon King's army, the bosses of the respective dungeons appear and sequester your friend's attention, leaving you to start your fight with Ganondorf alone. And where I start my grievances with the antagonist himself. You enter the room and experience the only disappointingly simple, character-defining lines that the Demon King speaks exclusively to Link in the entirety of the game.
How disappointing. This world should be shrouded in darkness, not bathed in insufferable light. All these weak, peace-loving cowards running rampant. It would have been more satisfying to overcome a worthy foe.
Regardless, I will reshape this world as it was meant to be. I will crush any opposition. I will rule. Do not look away. You witness a king's revival and the birth of his new world.
These disappointingly simple lines of dialogue are all that we have to personalize our antagonist and establish his relationship to our hero after they finally meet face to face. This is what we get even after Raru's rousing speech.
You're wrong. Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you. Link. Remember this name.
Link. Interesting. I look forward to meeting you.
Clearly you don't! Instead, Ganondorf comes off as one-dimensional and flat, which is a shame because he was set up to be one of the most compelling characters in the game. Think about it. From Ganondorf's perspective, he's the Gerudo's rightful king, their chief, a male born every 100 years who watches an alien come down from the sky, pick up a Hylian hottie for a wife, and declare himself king of the world. Ganondorf has perfectly good reason to be skeptical of this godlike being's claim of benevolence. He has perfectly good reason to not want to relinquish his role as the rightful ruler of the Gerudo. Yes, we learned that from the Lightning Sage that his, quote, obsession with power transformed him into a monster, but the groundwork for his sympathetic villain was set from the beginning. The closest thing we get to anything that even remotely resembles a reference to that context is, I will crush any opposition, I will rule, that is what a king must do. Here we get something that might be able to pass for character motivation, some self-defined sense of what Ganondorf views a king's responsibilities to be, but it comes up woefully short to being considered sufficient character development. He's so one-dimensional, he spends more time spouting the usual anime antagonist, I'm beginning to enjoy this, than he does talk about his character motivation. But the real disappointment is what he says after you beat him.
I will yet rule this land. You will not stop me. The immortal will not stand in my way.
it all to destroy you and cast this world into eternal night.
What happened to wanting to rule and be a king and carry out your own definition of kingly responsibilities? Technically, if you take these lines out of the scene, out of the dramatic music, and just read them, he says, "I will yet rule this land. You will not stop me. A mere mortal will not stand in my way. My body, my mind, everything. I'll sacrifice it all to destroy you and cast this world into eternal night." Which could be interpreted as Link pushed him into such a corner that the only way Ganondorf sees how he could still be a king is as a mindless dragon rampaging over a destroyed eternal night world, and that, though not ideal, at least he could still be considered a king of sorts that way, and that this action of eating his secret stone does still align with his "I will crush any opposition, I will rule, that is what a king must do" central theme. Fine, technically, this can still be considered in line with his character's singular stated motivation. But when you put it back in context with the music and the drama and the fact that the player just finished the most challenging and rewarding fight in the game in one-on-one combat with Ganondorf eating his secret stone reads more like it's out of personal spite to beat Link. It reads more like big "as long as you lose, I win" energy than it reads like a steel-willed resolution to maintain his values and personal belief of what it means to be a king, and that he will be a king no matter what the cost, even if it means he becomes a mindless dragon. Ganondorf was robbed in this game. Not only is he ridiculously hot, but he could have been the most sympathetic, relatable, and interesting Ganondorf iteration in the franchise. He could have had a really unique relationship with Link, with conversations pertaining to destiny and what it means to rule. Imagine if Link was able to go back in time to the ancient era when he interacted with the Dragon's Tears. Imagine if he interacted and fought with Prime Ganondorf in the past, built up some rapport, fought him on 2 timelines, and really developed a relationship to culminate in this final bout here under the castle where it all began. Would have been really cool. If the game went that direction instead, which granted would have resulted in a significantly different game, Link would have also been able to interact more with Zelda, which would have been awesome, and what happens next proves just how awesome that alternative version of the game could have been. After Ganondorf eats his secret stone and turns into a dragon, the moment fans have been waiting for finally happens. You finally get to play with Zelda. The absolute high of this moment can't be overstated. For all the story gripes and complaints and integration critiques I have about this game, this entire dragon fight with you pairing up with Zelda as the light dragon soaring through the sky is everything I wanted it to be. Like, just listen to my experience, it was phenomenal. Bae, is that you? Oh, it's Bae! Get him! Oh, she's so tiny! This is the most Zelda interaction we've gotten all game! This is awesome. Oh, dude, the music? Oh, I don't have gloom anymore. Let's go. Full health, baby. Jump off? Are you high? Nice. Babe, pick me up! Hey, what's up, honey? Hey, baby girl. Let's go do it again. Credit where credit is due, finally being able to interact with Zelda in a meaningful way to seal the darkness and defeat Ganondorf for good was a really sweet and unexpected surprise. That being said, as great as it was like eating 3-day-old steak. The best comparison to what this experience was like for me is a bit out there, but bear with me, I promise it'll make sense in the end. In Naruto, which started in 1999, it's revealed early that a shy character named Hinata has the hot for our protagonist, Naruto. This one-sided crush continues for 15 real-life years until Naruto ends in 2014. Through that 15-year runtime spanning 2 anime adaptations and a time skip, Naruto has exponentially more screen time and interactions with a character named Sakura, whom he's had a canonical crush on all the way since the beginning, back in 1999. Despite this though, Masashi Kishimoto, the author, ultimately decided that, in the end, that Naruto would end up with Hinata, despite them having very few moments together that would suggest a potential romance. To compensate for this, after the manga ended in 2014, in February of 2015, a feature-length canonical movie, one of the first of its kind back then, called Naruto the Last was released, whose plot exclusively revolved around Naruto and Hinata falling in love, in an attempt to make up for lost time and justify the manga's conclusion that segues into the show's successor, Boruto: The Next Generation. The problem was, the movie was terrible because, well, of course it was, but fans were so desperate for anything to canonize this love story that they ate it up. Imagine not eating anything substantial for 15 years. For 15 years of Naruto's runtime, there were precious few moments for Naruhina fans to triumphantly herald as canonical proof that their ship was superior and ordained by the author himself. And now this movie had to cram in 15 years worth of history into a 90-minute runtime. It was like eating for the first time in 15 years, and it's steak of all things. It's supposed to be delicious, like a peak experience, but it's 3 days old and has been left on the counter. You can taste the potential of what it was supposed to be, but circumstances have led it to its sorry state, and at least you're happy that you're eating it all. That's what this Zelda fight is like 3-day-old steak after not eating any Link and Zelda interaction for the entirety of your playthrough. It's great, you can taste the potential of what it was supposed to be, but circumstances have led it to its sorry state, and at least you're happy you're eating it all. The whole bit, Zelda turning back into a human, Link triumphantly catching her shirtless, by the way, to which she tells you, from her perspective, felt like a loving embrace, was phenomenal. Shippers rejoice, Zelda called Link's touch a loving embrace. Checkmate. But then the game reminds you of its sins and it doesn't even give you a kiss despite this.
I have so much to tell you. So much happened. Link.
No! Kiss me! We don't even get a hug! But when we're done waving our Z-Link flag of victory, Mipha's dead, everybody. Let's take a step back and turn our attention to the dragon in the room, or lack thereof. Zelda's transformation back into a human. The entire last sequence feels like a retcon. Retcon stands for Retroactive Continuity. It's a popular trope, albeit a negative one, and it's when a story reframes or adds past events to serve the current plot need, which, in this case, is turning Zelda back to normal. When something feels retconned, it makes whatever is happening feel unearned and usually breaks any suspension of disbelief. After you defeat Ganondorf and he nukes a rural countryside with nobody in it, of course, we get teleported to the Anime Talk no Jutsu space dimension and see Light Dragon Zelda just kinda chilling out. Link's go-go hand starts twitching, and Force Spirit Rauru and Sonya appear, and the three of them extend hands and excrete magical glow particles and together turn Zelda back to normal. Which is problematic for a couple reasons. First, how is Rauru back? At the end of the tutorial, the last thing he says before disappearing is, "I have done everything I can for her, but evidently not." Secondly, why does Sonya have a Force Ghost? It can be inferred that Zonai have Force Ghosts because they're like basically gods, but why and how is Sonya here? The best possible explanation I came up with is because it's due to her being an owner of a secret stone. Each of the four sages had their spirits preserved in the stone in some capacity, evident by them being able to speak to their descendants and explain what happened in ages past. By this logic, if you have a secret stone, at least part of your spirit or consciousness gets stored in the stone. Fine, I get that. But the problem with even this explanation, especially as it pertains to Sonya, is that we literally just destroyed her stone when we beat Ganondorf. That secret stone we stabbed triumphantly with our final attack? That was Sonya's secret stone. So even if that theory is true, how is she here? As for how they actually turn Zelda back, it's clear by the fact that Link isn't an amputee and still has both his arms, and that Zelda still has her secret stone after the transformation, that the three of them together used a stronger version of recall to span back thousands of years to turn Zelda back to normal. Which, firstly, is just an absolute mess from a time travel perspective. Like, talk about the butterfly effect in parallel universes, that's extremely messy. And then second, fine, say that's true, that begs the question, why didn't they do this earlier? Why couldn't Force Ghost Rauru appear to you when you were pulling the Master Sword out of Zelda's cranium and turn her back then? If we're being charitable, the only explanation as to why this didn't happen is that Ganondorf's mere presence prohibited it and stopped Rauru from reappearing until after his defeat. In-game evidence of this phenomenon can be seen when approaching Ganondorf's final location, when it says, "The power of a sage cannot reach you." So, fine. But even if that's true, why didn't Rauru tell you about this mechanic himself, or that he was even capable of coming back at all? The way he was written, he said, "I have done everything I can for her," and disappeared. That was it. Bye. Peace out. No promise of return. That's it. I guess you died for real again? His appearance feels unearned and inconsistent. As annoying as it might be, this same cop-out of Demon King interference could also explain how Mineru's spirit could be in Zelda's iPad that you get in the beginning of the game, yet remains silent and doesn't talk to you at all until you touch her mask at the start of her temple. For Mineru though, even if you wanted to keep that narrative cop-out of Ganondorf simply exists, how cool would it have been if when Pearl or Robbie takes a look at your Purapad, they notice something new and strange. They notice Mineru, but they don't know it's her. And this would be how you go about finding the fifth sage, or how you end up unlocking Mineru, and she could function as a sort of Navi or Midna companion for the game that is always around and telling you things through your Purapad. Mineru and Purah could have had a bunch of cool interaction as scientists throughout the game, as Mineru shares with her how Zonai tech works. Maybe Purah invents some new Zonai devices for you to use throughout your playthrough. And don't even get me started on how Impa said that she would review the ancient literature to see if she could turn Zelda back to normal, and then literally never mention anything about said ancient literature, even after she appears at the very end of the game. Bare minimum, Impa could have said some lore reason that explains what Rauru and Sonya did or how they were able to come back, but we didn't even get that. Study the ancient literature is just a throwaway line that doesn't end up meaning anything. Even if some of these explanations for the ending can make theoretical sense if you think hard enough about it, with the exception of Sonya, that doesn't make any sense at all, that's super dumb, it still doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel satisfying. No amount of golden hour money shot of Link yearning towards a conveniently angled Zelda so we don't look up her dress makes it okay. It feels convenient and contrived. It feels like a retcon. For me, it wasn't the dramatic moment they clearly wished it was. Which can lead us to ask the question, how did we get here? How did it end up like this? To which I propose a simple answer. Non-linear storytelling is the act of telling a story outside of chronological order. It's a breakaway from traditional, structured, linear storytelling. In games, linear storytelling is usually defined as the game being on rails. Non-linear storytelling used to be confined to something film school students would obsess over, idolizing the poster child of the storytelling technique, the cult classic Memento. But it's since grown in popularity as people tired of traditional narrative structure. Non-linear storytelling tends to prioritize snapshots of immediately understood emotion, while linear storytelling tends to prioritize big picture, big setup and payoff, beginning, middle, and end yarns. Games like Firewatch, BioShock Infinite, and Life is Strange all use linear storytelling techniques. The memory quests in Breath of the Wild and the Dragon Tears quests in Tears of the Kingdom, however, would be examples of non-linear storytelling. Trying to mix open-world exploration, which often lends itself to non-linear storytelling, with a compelling and engaging overarching narrative in video games is extremely difficult. An example of a game that successfully manages these opposing forces would be Red Dead Redemption 2. An example of a game that didn't do this as well, but still tried its best, would be Final Fantasy XV. Both would make great video essays in their own right, but for the scope of this video, just know that this balancing act is something that the games industry is well aware of. I'm going to cover the non-linear aspects of Tears of the Kingdom first, and then show, beat by beat, how despite trying to escape its linear roots, that the story of Tears of the Kingdom still mostly fits the linear story structure, and how a critical misstep in that linear story structure resulted in a fragmented experience for many players and ended up botching their ending. But first, the non-linear aspects. Tears of the Kingdom's non-linear aspects affect not only its story, but also its core loop. A game's core loop is the central gameplay mechanic through which the entire game is built. A core loop can be broken down into 3 sections: the minute-to-minute player interaction, the most repeated set of actions, and the engine that enables the player to progress. So as an example, a core loop in an RPG would be explore, fight, and upgrade. As you explore, you fight things. After you fight things, you upgrade parts of your character that help you continue to explore and continue to fight. The exploring is the minute-to-minute interaction. You're never not exploring, even if you're revisiting places you've already explored once before. The fighting and the combat mechanic is the most repeated set of actions, and the upgrade system or skill tree is the engine that enables the player to progress. Like all games, Tears of the Kingdom has a core loop too, but its core loop is heavily impacted by its non-linear design. To help us understand it better, we're going to compare it to the core loop of an older Zelda game that had much more linear design principles. In Wind Waker, the core loop is fight and explore, solve puzzles, get an item to continue fighting and exploring. An easy example of this is with the fire and ice arrows. In Wind Waker, you need power bracelets and iron boots to progress in your quest, but in order to achieve this, first you need the fire and ice arrows. From a core loop perspective, the player is fighting and exploring the world, the minute-to-minute interaction. They then see a cyclone, which in this example is the puzzle or the most repeated set of actions. The player solves the puzzle by choosing to get sucked inside and then shooting Cyclops with their bow. Solving this puzzle rewards the player with the Song of Gales, which allows them to warp inside the Mother and Child Isles and receive the fire and ice arrows, the item, or engine, that allows them to continue to fight and explore and solve puzzles. In Wind Waker, the core loop completes a loop when an item is added to the player's inventory or toolbox after completing a puzzle that is then used in the future to progress the story. You do this on repeat from beginning of the game to the end. It's neat, it's tidy, it's on rails and linear. In Tears of the Kingdom though, its game loop is non-linear and not so clearly defined. If it was linear, which it's not, but if it was, it would look something like this. Fight and explore, solve puzzles/build, and then get a Zonai device. If this was the core loop, you'd be rewarded with a Zonai device each time you solved a puzzle, but that's not the case. Unlike the Cyclone puzzle in Wind Waker, puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom are, yes, of course, the shrines, but its puzzles are also the act of building and using Ultra Hand itself. In Wind Waker, the engine to progress the game part of the core loop are the items themselves. You need the fire and ice arrows to get to Fire Mountain and Ice Ring Isle. In Tears of the Kingdom, the engine to progress the game is Ultra Hand, not the Zonai devices. Take this Tears of the Kingdom puzzle, for example. You're supposed to utilize Ultra Hand to combine these Zonai devices to build a device that allows you to traverse the rails in order to progress. But you don't have to do that. You can also just go up using Ascend, use Ultra Hand on these planks, and use Rewind to create a giant bridge and then float across. In this example, Ultra Hand and the skills you got in the beginning of the game are the engine that's needed to progress, not the Zonai devices. The Zonai devices are in the same category as the planks in the environment. This flexibility is a result of its non-linear design. This would never work in Wind Waker. In Wind Waker, there's no cheese. This abstraction of the core loop of non-linear design, or cheesing, in Zelda games began with Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, the game gave the players the Sheikah Slate, and gave the player all the Wind Waker-style tools up front. Bombs, Magnesis, Stasis, and Cryonis to complete all the game's puzzles, instead of gating them behind certain dungeons or story checkpoints. You get everything you need to beat the game right at the beginning, and then it's up to you to creatively apply what you've been given. You don't unlock them gradually like you do in past Zelda games. So in the Breath of the Wild sequel, Nintendo abstracted that concept and took it one step further and gave the player a Purapad and the means to create their own Wind Waker-style tools. Instead of having the player acquire and build their toolbox linearly like in past Zelda games, or give them the entire toolbox at once in the beginning like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom says, the world is your toolbox, and we'll fill it with interesting things, and gamify your imagination through Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, and Recall. It's the abstraction and non-linear evolution of the traditional linear Wind Waker core loop, and it's delighted and captivated countless players. So with that in mind, Tears of the Kingdom core loop looks something like this. Fighting and exploring is the minute-to-minute interaction, solving puzzles and building is the most repeated action, all held together by Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, and Recall. Zonai devices are out here off to the side and mostly not necessary. If a puzzle requires a Zonai device, the game will give it to you, but they're technically mostly optional. It's only natural then that Tears of the Kingdom would incorporate a similar non-linear design with their story. The Dragon's Tears are non-linear snapshots you can watch in any order to piece together the story of what happened to Zelda when she disappeared at the beginning of the game. You can think of the Dragon's Tears as individual, non-linear little holes that plop the player down onto a linear timeline of the game's story that exists outside of the game's core loop. But what if I told you that's not all? What if I told you that these non-linear Dragon Tears not only plop you onto the linear timeline of the Dragon Tears quest, but that despite the Tears of the Kingdom non-linear off-rails core loop, it's still moving on a second linear main story timeline, and that those two timelines, the one between the Dragon's Tears and the main story, converge to bring you to the end of the game. This is the balancing act of having non-linear gameplay with a linear overarching story. But in order to understand how Nintendo tried to incorporate this, and how this ultimately impacted the story's ending and the player's experience of the game's story, we'll first need to understand the game's story beats. Story beats are a concept used in storytelling structure to determine when things should happen. This is where Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, inciting incident, falling action, and a ton of other terms come from. They're all describing structure and formulas used in storytelling, and it's these same structures and formulas that the writers who use nonlinear storytelling are trying to avoid, or at least reimagine in their own way. Now, I'm on Team Structure. I think structure is great, and a great way to dip your toe into storytelling structure is through a famous screenwriting book called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. I'll be pulling these beats directly from the book, so if you want to go deeper into this, Save the Cat is a great place to start. It's been critiqued as being too formulaic and structured, and it's kind of a meme in the narrative writing community, but it's sort of a rite of passage to read before you can go deeper. Now, games are an interactive medium, so applying traditional storytelling techniques used in TV, film, and novels aren't as easily applied. This difference in medium is where terms like ludonarrative dissonance come from, which describes the conflict between a video game's narrative told through the story and the narrative told through its gameplay. Despite this though, you still see fiction writers from other entertainment industries coming to write stories for games, with an easy recent example being George R.R. Martin, the author of Ice and Fire book series, which got adapted into the hit TV show Game of Thrones, doing the world building for Elden Ring. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but just know that the act of applying linear story beats and story structure to an interactive medium like video games, much less non-linear open-world video games like Tears of the Kingdom, is a whole thing. By identifying the overarching main story beats present in Tears of the Kingdom and how the Dragon's Tears quest B story fits into it, we can identify how the ending felt retconned and why many players felt a break of immersion and narrative disconnect if they completed the Dragon's Tears quest early. We start with the opening image. The opening image is the very first impression of what a movie, or in this case, game, will be. It's its tone, its mood. Tears of the Kingdom's opening image is a lit torch in a dark cave. It's mysterious, dark, but with hope symbolized by the fire. It's also inherently explorative, with a torch lighting up the darkness, as well as being a callback and recognition of how long fans have been waiting for this game by using a similar shot that was used in the E3 2019 trailer. Good opening images contrast with the closing image, which this one does, but we'll get to that later. Early in the game, someone, usually not the main character, will pose a question or make a statement usually to the main character that's the theme of the story. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is when Zelda says to Link, "Let's go solve this mystery," referring to the appearance of gloom. After the prologue, once Zelda disappears, the main quest of the game is finding Princess Zelda and finding out what happened to her, why Ganondorf is here, who he is, and how we can beat him, all of which could be summed up thematically as solving a mystery. The setup is where you set up every character in your A story, your main story, and it sets up the stakes and the goal of the story. It sets the stage. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is where Zelda gushes about the prophecy on the wall. It establishes Link and Zelda as the characters in the A story. This is the story about the two of them. They are the main characters, Link and Zelda. This also serves to function as the game's stakes. A game's stakes is what the hero stands to lose if things go bad. Here, the stakes are Zelda's and Link's relationship, their togetherness. This setup also establishes the goal of the story, to discover and learn about this ancient prophecy and how our heroes fit into it. This is confirmed at the end of the game when you're on your way back to Ganondorf, you can break the rocks that obscure the rest of the mural seen here in the intro, and see that it depicts Rauru losing to the Demon King and Zelda restoring the Master Sword and turning into a dragon. The catalyst is the moment in the story that knocks down and drastically destroys everything established in the setup. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is of course when Ganondorf wakes up, the Master Sword breaks, and Zelda falls into the void and disappears. The debate is when the hero contemplates going on the journey and engaging with the catalyst. If the hero already knows they're going to respond to the catalyst, then this section asks the questions, are you capable of doing so? In Tears of the Kingdom, it's the latter. Link has no internal debate if he's going to go after Zelda. Instead, he has to figure out how he'll accomplish this. This is where he goes through Tutorial Island, receives the tools required for his mission, and the player learns how to play the game. Break Into 2 is the transition from Act 1 to Act 2, and it's a transition that the hero must consciously, proactively make for himself to go into the new world on his quest and leave the old world behind. In Tears of the Kingdom, this happens literally, with Link physically diving off Tutorial Island and diving into the big new world down below. The B story is a story break, where the player gets to take a little breather from the story and gets introduced to a brand new bunch of characters, each with their own plight and backstory. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is when Link goes to Lookout Landing and meets with Purah, Joshua, and Robbie and learns about the strange phenomena happening in the other regions, the depths, and the Lucky Clover Gazette. Spotting fake Zelda atop Hyrule Castle functions as a B story because even though it's Nintendo's attempt to link the A story and B story together, it's obvious to the player that it's not her due to her actions, and it's folded in with the Lucky Clover Gazette quests. The majority of the Dragon's Tears memories fall into this category as well, with the exception of the final tier. The fun and games section is the promise of the premise. It's the trailer footage. It's the reason you're watching the movie or playing the game. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is the game. This is Korok Crucifixion. This is wide world exploration and dungeons oh my. This is off-the-rails, non-linear enjoyment. Narratively, the fun and games section formally ends after you complete the 4 dungeons Purah placed on your Purah pad at the start of the B story. The midpoint is the halfway point of the story, and it's where the stakes are raised. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is the Phantom Ganon fight in the throne room, where the sages gather for the first time and meet the big bad for themselves. The stakes are raised because it's clear that it's not just Zelda and Link's relationship that's at stake here, here, it's the fate of the world. If Link doesn't stop Ganondorf, not only will his relationship with Zelda be in jeopardy, but the world itself will fall into darkness. The game recognizes this by pivoting away from the Find Princess Zelda narrative to Find the Fifth Sage and focuses on stopping the evil in front of them. Until this point, Nintendo has done a pretty good job hitting their linear narrative story beats, but it's from this point on that the story begins to unwind. Bad Guys Close In is known to be a difficult section to write. It's the portion of the story from the midpoint to the all is lost moment, the beat after this. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have this section. It's supposed to be the section where the big bad feels bigger and badder. A hypothetical example of this would have been after you defeat Phantom Ganondorf in the throne room, the game would have had a permanent blood moon and everything is spooky all the time with all the enemies covered in gloom until you beat the game. The all is lost moment is when the hero loses, otherwise known as the false defeat. In Tears of the Kingdom, this is when the champions lose to the Demon King. Rauru literally dies to imprison him, and Zelda becomes a dragon. The all is lost moment is synonymous with death in some form. Rauru literally dies, and Zelda figuratively dies, losing her mind and sense of self to become the Light Dragon. Despite each dungeon quest retelling their successor how they lost to the Demon King and undercutting its impact, showing two cutscenes back to back after acquiring Minoru, the fifth stage, one showing Raru's death more in detail, and the other setting the stage for Zelda's Draconification, helps Nintendo claw back some narrative investment they lost along the way. It's this second cutscene setting up Zelda's Draconification, along with Zelda and Raru's death parallels, that all but confirms Nintendo intended the player to experience this all is lost moment and finish the Dragon Tears quest after acquiring the fifth sage. The Dark Night of the Soul is the hero's reflection on the all is lost moment. It's looking death in the face and having a "Father, why have you forsaken me" moment. It's hopeless and sad and absent. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have this moment. It skips this narrative beat entirely. Link never processes the defeat of Rauru sacrificing himself and Zelda turning into a mindless beast. The NPCs don't either. The closest we get is an ellipsis from Purah and a sad exclamation from Impa when you complete the Dragon Tears quests. If a player completed the Dragon's Tear quest before reaching the appropriate story point and saw that final tier memory during the fun and games and B story of exploration, they effectively leapt forward to the third act but are under-equipped to enter it, for in the third act lies the final fight with Ganondorf. They're left here, teleported to the non-existent Dark Night of the Soul, staring at the break into Act 3, completely underprepared to do anything with all of these emotions that the game doesn't acknowledge. A possible interpretation could be that Zelda's Draconification is the Dark Night of the Soul moment itself, because Zelda processes Raru's death by deciding that Draconification is the only option left in order for them to defeat Ganondorf. That might be technically accurate, but Zelda isn't the hero. Zelda isn't the main character, it's Link, it's the player. So even if Zelda could process Raru's death, Link and the player can't process either along with any of the NPCs because Link is a silent hero. If Link is a silent hero and can't process it himself, then the NPCs have to process it on his behalf. And if they don't process it either, then the hero, Link, the player, they can't process the sacrifice of either Rauru or Zelda. I made a whole other video essay talking about how devastating this lack of a story beat was to my personal player experience, so I won't go over it again here, but just know that the Dark Night of the Soul in Tears of the Kingdom is noticeably absent and detrimentally impacts both Rauru and Zelda's sacrifice, as well as the player's immersion. Break into 3 is the break into the third act, where the hero identifies the solution to overcome the baddie and spring back from defeat. In Tears of the Kingdom, that solution is the reacquiring of the Master Sword. The Master Sword is the key to defeating Ganondorf, and with Link triumphantly retrieving it atop Dragon Zelda's head, he's ready to go fight the big bad. The finale is, of course, where the story wraps up. It's where the hero applies his lessons and not just wins, but fundamentally changes the world. The finale is also where the A and B story wrap up, and Nintendo does this well by having the B story of the sages conclude by them succeeding where their ancestors failed, and the A story conclude by having Zelda not only fight with you to defeat Ganondorf, but also turn back into a human and almost give you a kiss. The final image is the opposite of the opening image. It's the proof that change has happened in the world. In Tears of the Kingdom, the final image is one of the vast expanse of sky, a beautiful vista, contrasting beautifully to the dark cave we saw at the beginning. Nintendo really did craft an amazing story. They did a lot of things right. But now that we know the story beats, why did the ending still feel retconned? The answer is in the stakes. By skipping the Dark Night of the Soul, the story glossed over the stakes it defined. It didn't look death in the face. The stakes of Rauru and Zelda's sacrifice, Rauru and Zelda's deaths, weren't given the proper attention or weight they deserved. Because the game didn't acknowledge or meaningfully ruminate on the nature of Raru's and Zelda's sacrifice, their value wasn't fully explored or appreciated. We know that Rauru sacrificed himself, but did he really? He's literally a Force Ghost in the beginning of the game, unexplained, and that same Force Ghost comes back at the end, also unexplained. We didn't know for sure he was really dead, and when it was evident he wasn't really dead when he gave us his arm, we didn't really know he was fully alive, because he died again shortly after once we finished the tutorial island. Did it even matter that he sacrificed himself? Will he fully respawn eventually, or was that respawn at the game a one-time thing? Evidently it was at least a two-time thing since he came back at the end of the game too. Is it a timer? Is he recharging somewhere? What exactly did it mean for Rauru to die? Even in the closing cutscene, Minoru says that she'll tell Sonya and Rauru how much Zelda loved them, but is that literal or figurative or just flavor text? Is he alive somewhere else, and if so, how does that work with our current plane of existence? The same is true for Zelda. The game sets it up as she's lost forever and will forever be a light dragon, only to, well, nonsensically decide that that's not true. They didn't foreshadow anything to suggest that Zelda could get turned back. The closest thing you could get to foreshadowing is Impa's throwaway line of reviewing the ancient text to see if she could find a solution, which she doesn't even do. They just sidestepped the entire issue and didn't let Link or any of the characters contemplate, appreciate, or mourn her sacrifice at all. Because of this, when the two who sacrificed the most came back in the end, arbitrarily with no build-up, apprehension, foreshadowing, or explanation, it just rang hollow and contrived. Even Zelda's reaction to seeing Link again goes against the drama they were trying to build up between the two with the dramatic, successful catch parallel and the myriad of environmental storytelling clues saying that they might actually kinda sorta be in a relationship. While it's understandable that they're hesitant to canonize a romantic relationship between the two, Zelda's reaction to seeing Link and her lack of affection undermines the emotional impact of their reunion. While I can understand not having a kiss, I still fundamentally don't understand why they couldn't even hug, even as friends. Though it's understandable that Nintendo wouldn't want to ruminate on dark themes such as death, especially to keep an E rating on their game, refusing to meaningfully dwell, acknowledge, or introspectively have their story process the sacrifice of its characters robbed them of the narrative impact they so desperately wanted. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, after all, as many will point out, this is a Nintendo game, what did you expect? Tears of the Kingdom is a great game. Yes, I stopped playing it halfway through and had to be convinced to finish it through comments from strangers on the internet, and I definitely have my share of grievances, but it's still an incredible technical accomplishment. As someone who loves experiencing stories in an interactive medium, I was of course disappointed by Nintendo's stumbling, but I also recognize that this is Nintendo and that this is Zelda. This isn't Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Witcher. It's not a coincidence that both Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Witcher are rated M and Zelda is rated E, and that they have the stories that they do. I love the lore and world building of the Zelda franchise. I love the balance they strike with their tone. I love how it's not an M game. You don't need a really dark and gritty, edgy M-rated game to have a great story. You just need to honor the stakes you create and respect the sacrifices of your characters. I can't wait to see where Nintendo takes the Zelda franchise next. Whenever it is, whatever it looks like, I'll be there. Maybe third time's the charm. Thanks for watching.